To everyone. Welcome to the third of our Winter Spring 2024 series about fundraising for nonprofits. I am Dr. Pierre Rogers. I'm the director of the Axelson Center here at North Park University in Chicago. Axelson Center programs are inclusive of workshops and webinars and awards for nonprofit managerial excellence. We do custom training. We do a boot camp for new nonprofit executive directors. It's actually coming up this summer, July 31st through August 2nd. And this year, 2024, is a very special year for us. It's our 25th anniversary, and we're celebrating in several ways. One is a reception. You saw the slide on the screen at the start. It's at the Provisio location on Wells Street, right on the Chicago River, and it's on May 16th. We'd love for you to register and join us for that. We're also doing our annual conference on October 18th. That will also include more celebratory events. The theme for our conference is More Than Money, Philanthropy, Fundraising, and Justice. And we're planning great speakers and breakout sessions for that. So today's session continues with the deeper content that we launched on last week. Doug Diefenbach will lead us in learning more about tuning into the donor perspective and the key questions that they want answered as they consider support. We're really excited to have Doug back. It's been a while, and he holds a special place in my heart because his wife used to work here at the Axelson Center way back a while ago. But Doug is the Vice President for Strategy and Brand at Foster Avenue. That's a creative agency that just happens to share the same names as the street where North Park University is located. But Doug is an accomplished marketing and communications professional specializing in nonprofit philanthropic communications. He served with both senior staff and in consultant roles for over 35 years and has helped a wide variety of organizations to exceed their goals for brand visibility, constituent engagement, and philanthropic revenue. At Foster Avenue, Doug is the main message strategist and editorial lead on all communications. You can read more about Foster Avenue in Doug's bio, but just know they've been around for 40 years and they focus on providing strategic philanthropic communications and campaign branding in higher education, in healthcare, and in cultural institutions. So Doug will let you know specifically how he wants to handle questions, but he's let us know that it's fine for you to put the questions in the chat, and then we'll figure if they need to get answered at that moment, or should really probably wait until the formal Q&A at the end. So let's get started. Doug, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. Hope I will anyway. Right, technology now taken care of. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming along this morning, and thank you, Pierre, for that great introduction. It is indeed great to be back at Axelson Center, talking about a topic dear and near to my heart. So that is the case statement, talking your donor's language. I'm coming to you today from the Mile High city of Denver, Colorado. I was presenting here at the American Healthcare Philanthropy Conference yesterday. So my speaking voice is all, tuned up, and I'm ready to go. So you'll get the benefit of that. As Pierre said, Foster Avenue has been around for 40 years, and we work doing pretty much one thing, which is philanthropic communications. And as we'll talk about this morning, philanthropic communications are distinctive enough that it's kind of a special language that's what keeps us in business. It's a niche that we work toward. My title is VP of Strategy and Brand, but I think my more informal title and probably more accurate title would be Chief Kool-Aid Drinking Officer, because my delight and my privilege is to spend my professional career coming into organizations like yours, understanding what it is that you do, why it's different from other organizations, what the things are that people should get excited about knowing about you, and returning that back to you in a package that hopefully will inspire your donors, inspire your staff, and inspire everyone that comes into contact with your organization. So I love what I do, and I've been doing it for a long time, and that's why I keep presenting at North Park, I think. So the subline here, talking your donor's language, is really a critical part of everything we're going to do today. This is, as opposed to saying just what you want to say about yourself, it's important to stop and think, what is it that my donor, my constituent wants to hear? I need to be able to talk their language, and we will investigate that in many ways. Philanthropic communications, I'm going to talk about examples from nonprofits of every size, some of them very large. Right now, I'm working on the largest campaign I'm working on at the moment is $2 billion. That was B with a B as in billion. But before you go and switch off, understand that the principles that I'm talking about here apply to any size organization, because really this talking the donor's language is something that every nonprofit can and should do. So for the topic we're talking about, the case statement, there really is no difference between your nonprofit and that $2 billion campaign. So with that in mind, let's move ahead to what the agenda looks like. We're going to talk about the challenge of philanthropic communications. We're going to talk about the case as the base of your philanthropic communications. We're going to talk about the vocabulary of values, and I'll leave that a little mysterious for the moment. For those of you who are here looking for practical tips on how do you actually write a case statement, we'll get that to you as well. We might have a chance to give you a little hands-on head start on writing your new case statement, and we'll cover this with various tales from the front as we go. And just for today, just because it's the Axelson Center, we're also going to reveal the 8 great truths of case statements. That's right, there are 8, and we'll find them along the way. So strap in and let's begin. First of all, let's talk about the challenge of philanthropic communications. As you know, because you're here, all nonprofits are looking for a more effective way to spread their message. Am I right? Including this guy who says, I'm looking for the senator. If you see the old Shoot cartoon, the senator says, I'm looking for a more effective way to spread my message. Any suggestions? Well, you have 2 options, a pitchfork or a shovel. Now, my recommendation for you today is to make sure that what you are communicating is so good that you never have to use one of those methods to spread it. And we're going to try to get you started on doing that. This is a lighthearted look, but in fact, nonprofit organizations do have a serious communications challenge, and that is we're all facing a big squeeze, are we not? There is competition, increasing competition for the increasingly fragmented attention of the people we're trying to reach. I think, over the decades, the amount of messages reaching a person in a day has, increased so exponentially. It's a bewildering place out there that you're trying to get your message through to. And in part because people are receiving so many messages, they don't have time for, and they don't have patience for a complication and for complexity at a time when many of our organizations are having to deal with increased complexity and have, a more in-depth story that they need to tell. So that puts pressure on us as communicators. We know donors are changing too, in just one way. They're giving less out of duty and more out of investment. We also have seen over just the past couple of years a reduction in the number of donors significantly nationwide, giving larger gifts, but fewer donors, and that's concerning as well. How do we fight back against that? And also, there's an increased role for philanthropy at nonprofits in general. It used to be that big institutions like health systems and universities, it was great to have philanthropy there, but it wasn't critical. Nowadays, all nonprofits, philanthropy is how they move forward and how they advance their mission and fill up the coffers. So there's increased competition. Now, as important as philanthropy is, I think communications is even more important. And you might expect me to say that because I'm the communications guy, right? And I'm going to make a statement now that might sound like heresy in a room full of development people, as I assume you are, but my assertion is that communications lead philanthropy. And my logic is this, that the primary objective of advancement, fundraising, must not be to raise money. Seems a little counterintuitive, but the objective of what you do should be essentially to engage, motivate, and serve your constituents. And if you do that engagement and motivation and serving well, the result is to raise money. And of course, engaging, motivating, and serving is what the communications do for you so that you can do the fundraising. The purposes of philanthropic communication, of course, are to inform your constituency, to build a sense of affiliation, to build pride in the affiliation with your organization, to create a call to action, to motivate and educate your volunteers, very important, and to distinguish you from every other nonprofit out there. And oh, wait a minute, that last one is in orange type and italics. That must suggest something, and it does, because I hate to break it to you, but your attempts to distinguish yourselves from other nonprofits isn't working. My friend Adrian Sargent did some research that said, research shows that most people have great difficulty discriminating between the personalities of even leading nonprofit brands, those big national brands. The public has a strong sense of what it means to be a nonprofit, but it finds it very difficult to distinguish between causes, much less specific nonprofits. And to be blunt, nonprofits are perceived as a bland, homogenous mass of well-meaning but similar organizations. And without differentiation, there's little loyalty or emotional bonding between donors and nonprofits. I don't know if at 10 a.m. in the morning today you were ready to hear that you were a bland, homogenous mass, and I'm sorry to have to bring you that information. We'll let you deal with that as you may throughout the rest of the day. But the real issue here is that last statement, which is without differentiation, there's little loyalty or emotional bonding between donors and nonprofits, which that's bad, right? Because last time I looked, loyalty and motivational bonding is your stock in trade and what it takes to advance your relationships with your donors. So my question to you is, can we allow this situation to continue? Well, no, of course not. I say to you that the denizens of the bland, homogenous mass, we must awaken to a better way of doing communications so that we can differentiate our nonprofits. It is possible to do that. And by doing some investment in your message and making sure that you're doing this well. So if we're trying to differentiate our nonprofit from others so that people will have a reason to support us, we want to make ourselves different, right? Well, yes, but it's not enough to be different. Different is good, but you have to be different in ways that are valued by your target audience. That's simple, right? You just have to figure out how you stand out. Well, not so, because in marketing is always about trying to distinguish your product, your company, whatever it might be. But we're not here just to grab mind share so that we can grab consumers. We're here to appeal to people, to donors who are making a very different kind of decision and receiving a very intangible kind of payoff from engaging with our organization, as opposed to buying the Tesla or whatever it might be. Marketing wants butts in seats, if I can put it delicately, butts in seats or in desks or in beds, depending on what sector you're in. Whereas development wants long-term relationships that develop over time and become more and more valuable to the organization. So it's a little bit different kind of language, and it's not simple. Some people think it's simple. Well, marketing and fundraising are very similar, but they are distinctively different. And this comment from my friend Marie Bullock, vice president of the Alpha Group, makes that plain. Marketing generalists tend not to understand philanthropy. For example, the marketing folks at a nonprofit retirement community might show a Gucci-wearing, BMW-driving widow in their collateral because that's the kind of resident we want to attract. But that image is not helpful to philanthropy, to that same retirement community. And marketers are very often challenged to make the pivot from those kinds of messages to the kind of messages that donors need to hear. It is a whole different mindset. And marketing is driven, of course, by offering people an advantage or an experience that they're going to, benefit from themselves. Giving is driven by offering people the satisfaction of doing something for someone else. And that takes specialized mindset and voice. And that is why you write a case statement. Figure out how to say that the right way for your organization. So let's dive into your case as the basis for all of your other communications and philanthropic communications. So we'll do a little defining here. The case is an articulation of your organization's purpose, vision, and needs. It is a persuasive document. The desired action response that we want people to take is clear. It explores the philanthropic value proposition. When people give money, here's what happens. It's not a brochure. This is not an external facing document. It's internal because as we'll explore in a moment. And then a question about length. Back when I started writing case statements, back when we were still writing them on clay tablets in hieroglyphics, we would write them, and usually they were 20 or 25 pages long. That has changed now, of course, given the public's fading ability to handle complexity and long things. We do still write them that long because we feel that you have to go long so you can go short. And then we'll get into that later with the tips. But we also recognize that, many people, especially, board members, want the case in a page. So you need to be able to flex in that way. More on that later. But more on what the case statement is. It is grounded in your organization's strategic plan. Or sometimes it's vice versa, because I've seen lots of instances where a well-crafted case for support actually gets so much traction in the organization that it changes the strategic plan. And we can talk about that as well. The case builds understanding and consensus among a mostly internal audience. It provides an early cultivation and endorsement opportunity, primarily if you're going into some kind of a campaign or a big fundraising effort. Helps to recruit the volunteer leadership, and primarily acts as a central resource document for all of your other philanthropic communications. It creates the flow, the logic, the emotion, and the repository of language that you will repurpose over and over again in many different communications. So, it can be very, very helpful. So you ask, though, oh, well, come on, Doug, is it really that important that I sit down and write this document, especially if it's going to be 20 pages? I wouldn't say that you necessarily have to write a 20-page case statement, but if you ask, do you really need a case statement? I respond, yes, and I'll tell you that we have stumbled upon great truth number one. You can raise money without a real case statement, but you can't raise real money. Sure, all it takes to raise money these days is to put, a picture of a baby in need in a social media post, and you can get a fund me sort of campaign going, and you can raise money that way. But if you are going to have a program, a multidimensional program that gets both small gifts and major gifts and grants, you need to have a case statement that works out all of the connections between your mission, how it drives your programs, why donors should accept this as a way for them to make a difference in the world. And the case statement is where all of that begins. It engages, it elucidates, it educates, it excites, it impassions, because they couldn't think of another E word, and it makes the campaign real by involving people. And that is something that I'm going to talk about here a little bit more. It makes your campaign or your fundraising efforts, even if you're not on a campaign, real by involving people. And that's our doorway into great truth number two. Your case statement is a process, not a product. Yes, you are going to put words on a page, and you're going to be able to have that three-dimensional set of printouts about what your case statement is. But the real value of having written that case is the writing of it and the back and forth that it takes to understand and examine what is our organization about, figuring out how to articulate that, letting people have access into that and to react to it. And it's that process of writing the case statement that is really building your culture of philanthropy. If you write a case, you engage in explaining the organization's value proposition and giving people a role in helping to do that is what creates belief in that value proposition. So it's a process more than it is a product. And that suggests great truth. Number three, we're knocking them down fast here. You're writing for the volunteer, not for the donor. Yes, of course, you have the donor in mind as you are writing this because you're really, trying to persuade them about why your organization should get their gift. But the main impact that you're writing for is on the volunteer. Remember, this is an internal document. And as always, we go back to the fundamental principle that people give to people, they don't give to documents. And so the main impact of your case is to put fire in the belly of your volunteer, to make them feel that they do understand what you do and that you work out all the ways that people will support your organization so that those people can go out and represent you and be good ambassadors for the organization. That's the kind of thing that is critical at a critical time, especially if you're going into a campaign. If you're going into some sort of a campaign and you don't need to have a campaign to need to have a case, of course, but a campaign is a special time. It's basically a product launch, right? That's a product your campaign is that you're putting out into the world, out into the philanthropic marketplace. And if a campaign is a product, then your case is the R&D process where you are figuring out what does this product look like and how does it work and how do we use it. The process of doing the case is also relevant anytime that you are wanting to do more recruiting of volunteers, cultivating of major donors, focusing your annual appeal, energizing the development function in general. And all of those situations have one thing in common. They're all times when you need agreement. Said most simply, a case is important when you need agreement among a group of people about what your organization does, and how it does it, and why it does it well, and why people should support it. That agreement is critical to the culture of philanthropy at your organization and for your actual effectiveness of your fundraising. Without agreement about what it is that we do and why it makes a difference, there can be no campaign. There can be no fundraising. And the agreement that this group of people understand that we're doing this because we want to raise this money because we want to make something happen, that agreement is articulated in the case statement. It sort of becomes the manifesto of that agreement. And without the case, there is not going to be any movement. There's not going to be any agreement. So agreement about what? Well, we're talking about what it is that our organization is and why donors will find value in it. So what is going to make your case statement effective as you go out to do that? Well, first thing that comes to mind is it ought to be true. That would be nice if the case statement is true. But I will also say that you can get so hung up in truth that it turns into a report about what you do. And that's not necessarily what you want in your case, or that's at least not where you want to stop in your case. A case statement is always aspirational, thinking about what is the organization going to be in the future with the insertion of philanthropy to make it different and to advance it. So you're stating the truth of who you are today, but in a way that also makes it clear who you're going to be tomorrow. And don't apologize for being aspirational in your language. It should capture the organization's unique character to try to get out of the bland, homogenous mass, of course. It should build on strengths rather than needs. People want to support a winner. You're not there saying, we need money, so give it to us. You're doing it because we do a great job with the money that people give us, so give us money. And you need to really look into and explore in your case rigorous answers to the why questions that are going to be in the mind of every donor who hears about your organization. Why now? Why here? Why this? Why now? Why is this money needed now? There's always got to be an element of urgency, especially if you're in a campaign mode. There's always got to be an element of urgency about why we're raising the money. And the urgency should be something external to the organization. We're not raising money because we need it to stay alive. We're not doing it because it's time for us to have a campaign. We're doing this fundraising because the world is asking our organization to serve in a different, more enhanced way. And it's philanthropy that's going to get us there. So it's the world that is causing us to make this outreach to our donors. And that's the why now. And that why now should be about something that donors recognize in their own lives. They see it in, in their realm as well. And that agreement is what gets you them to listen to you. Having excited this idea of understanding about the why here or the why now, then you can go on to why here. And only then can you go on to why here. If there's this urgency, then why would you invest in this nonprofit as the place to make a difference? And then finally, why this? This is the place where a lot of organizations don't continue on and don't persist. They just stop with talking about why our organization. And you need to also be able to go deeper to say, why do the particular programs that we need support for, how do they move the needle on the urgency that we've identified? So it's that combination of why now, why here, why this, that should be the spine of your case statement. What makes case effective? Continuing that, it should be, as you obviously have understood by now, future-oriented, emphasizing the vision. It should place, if you're doing a campaign, those goals in terms of a longer-term vision. We're not raising it for today, but really, how is this organization going to be changed in its ability to do its mission because of what we're raising the money for? And, so claiming a transformational impact on the institution should be the part of the case, especially if you're going into a campaign. And the case should present a rationale that is larger than the institution. What do we mean by that? Well, it's especially true in a campaign, but anytime a campaign is enabling your vision as an organization. It's going to support who your organization is going to grow up to be. And that vision is bigger than we need support for this program or that project or this building. It's about the vision of the world that you're trying to bring about through that building and that program and that project. So the rationale has got to be larger than the institution. You're not supporting our institution so much as something that we're trying to achieve. And that brings us to great truth number 4. Your institution is the last thing that your case should talk about. What I mean by that is you should start with relating the needs of the world, the needs of your constituents, before you ever talk about your organization in your case statement. Because that's what I mean by the institution should be the last thing that you talk about. Your organization is the answer, not the question. And many nonprofits start out by saying, okay, well, I'm writing my case, so I need to say from the very beginning, it's got to be about us and say what we do. First it's got to say who you do it for and why you do it, and then talk about your organization. Because there's no reason to listen to things about your organization until I'm hooked on the former. Your organization really, in many ways, is a means to an end for the donor. And we have to be realistic about that. All right. So if we're trying to make these connections with donors, you have to figure out, well, where do we begin? Well, how about beginning inside the heads of the people that you're trying to motivate? And that means a little bit of understanding about donor motivations. Now, I'll put a disclaimer here and say, I'm not a fundraiser. Most of you probably are. But understanding donor motivation, you use this probably all the time in your work. So I don't want to say that I've got the inside track on this, but for the sake of having a common language, let's look and kind of dive into what donor motivations are really all about, because that's how we write an effective case. I'll begin to do that, of course, just as you would expect, by the next little bit here, where I will provide you some information about the dietary decisions of foxes, about seasonal insect festations, about the locomotive stamina of various species of quadrupeds, and it's a little bit of information about the habitat preparation of various barnyard animals. I'll pause for a moment while you scratch your heads and say, what is he talking about? Well, let me say it this way. when I say the dietary decisions of foxes, I mean to invoke the story of the fable of the fox and the grapes, who, when he was trying to eat those grapes, do foxes eat grapes? I don't even know. That's the fable. It says that he could not reach them, though he jumped. And so his resolution was to say, I bet they're sour anyway. And the moral of that story that it teaches us is that we all discount the things that we can't have. So when I talk about seasonal infestations of insects, I'm of course referring to the story of the ant and the grasshopper, the industrious ant who gathered food all summer versus the playful grasshopper who did not and, well, died. The moral of the story here of this fable, of course, is about the importance of preparation and planning and persistence. Everybody knows that, right? Speaking of some other foolish animals, we have this story that you'll know right away. This is not about the locomotive stamina shown by species of quadrupeds, or maybe it is, because this is the story of the tortoise and the hare. The hare became overconfident in his ability to win the race, took a nap, and ended up losing to the turtle. And of course, this story is there to remind us that slow and steady wins the race. And when I talk about habitat preparation by domesticated barnyard animals, I'm of course talking about the three little pigs who had their house blown down by the big bad wolf. And the moral, of course, that they teach us is that to make sure that your realtor gets you a great home inspection before signing on the dotted line. Okay, there are other morals to those stories as well. But the question you're asking here, I'm sure, as I hope that you do, is what do case statements have to do with all of these ridiculous animals that I'm talking about here? Well, here's where they connect. You knew what I was talking about. When I cast them as this dietary decisions of foxes, it makes no sense whatsoever. But when I reduce those stories to their value content, to the things that really connect with people's lives, suddenly now recognition comes clear. And you knew the points of these stories as soon as I said the fox and the grapes or the tortoise and the hare. You knew that story, you clicked into it. They were an effective touch point to a set of values. And we use these kinds of fables, we've used them for hundreds of years to teach kids, the values that we want them to know. So clearly, value-laden content has impact and staying power with people. And that is why we have to connect with our constituents' values if we're going to make a connection that will move them to give. And that is why this presentation is talking about talking your donor's language. Now, I once wrote a fable about an organization where I worked back in the early 2000s. And it is a large organization, but again, I will remind you that even though this is a large organization, the principles at play here work in organizations of every size. But at Advocate Healthcare, now perhaps Advocate Aurora Healthcare or Advocate something else, they've merged a couple of times. But at the time that I was working with them back then, Advocate was Illinois' largest healthcare provider, had 11 hospitals serving 2.5 million people, had two hospitals that were in the nation's top 100, were one of 5 top integrated health systems in the nation. And they, were based on a combination of clinical excellence and community outreach was kind of what they tried to achieve. They were a faith-based organization as a result of merger of 2 other systems. Again, a huge nonprofit, right? And I was employed there in the early 2000s when they were starting into their first system-wide campaign. They had the challenges of this campaign that came to be called Exceptional Care Without Exception, the campaign for Advocate Healthcare, with a goal of $125 million. And for all kinds of things, for facilities, for equipment, for programs, for endowment. In fact, the campaign had 58 different priorities, 58 different funding priorities. And I will submit to you that 58 of anything cannot be termed priorities with a straight face, because that's too many things to talk about. And that became part of the challenge here. This was their first opportunity to define advocate for the philanthropic constituency, because this was not long after the merger of two systems that had formed advocate, and that name was new, and people in their donors didn't really know much about what this big new organization was going to be about. So we looked at the idea of how do we position advocate now that we're planning this campaign, and we had lots of options. Well, the conventional approach to talking about ourselves would be to distinguish ourselves, right, by size. We're the largest in the state, so that counts for something, right? We're our reach. We are in urban areas, we're in the suburbs, we're everywhere, and that is something that is distinctive to us. We are comprehensive. We do everything under the sun for healthcare in our hospitals. We are faith-based because we, have this heritage as part of our organization, and on and on and on, yada, 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 about all of the things that you could say that characterize Advocate and make it different from every other healthcare provider in that time. But would that have been the best way for us to connect with our constituents' needs? Well, no. Because remember, it's not enough to be different. You must be different in ways valued by your target audience. And originally we thought, well, we'll talk about what makes Advocate different and all of those big things, we're the largest, et cetera. But we realized very quickly as we started to do that, wait, that's not why people give us money. We have to meet them with what it is that they value about us, not about what we want to say about ourselves that will distinguish us. Can't assume that they will give just because we're big. So we had to stop and ask ourselves, as you should do as well, what do donors really value? What do they really value? Well, of course, they want to create change for your constituents, for organization, society. Or so they say. That's what they want to do. This stumbles us into great truth number 5. Every gift, there are good reasons, and then there are the real reasons. The good reasons for giving are all very rational and externally understandable things. Well, the institution produces good results, so I made my gift. They have a demonstrated need for support, so I made my gift. Their Charity Navigator score is excellent, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all the good reasons by people, and the outwardly understandable things, the things that they might say to you about why they gave. But the real reasons are something different. They're a little more internal and a little more personal. People really give for the opportunity to feel heroic, or to act on a sense of gratitude that they have to pay back a debt or to pay it forward, as they say. Or people give because they are at a place in life where they want to leave a legacy, a mark for posterity, and giving to this organization or this campaign is a way they can do that. Some people give because they just want to feel connected to something larger, to be doing something with a group of people that they know and respect for a community that they are a part of. Some people give because their real reason is they just love associating with a winner. If there's something excellent and I can be a part of it by helping to give money, that may be something that is an internal reward that I feel. Some people feel an internal reward by creating a better world. That is, by putting something in place, unlocking a future that we wouldn't have had otherwise without my support. And unlocking the future is something that is internally motivating to me. Or it could just be that I'm giving because I recognize in your organization something that corresponds with my values. You represent, this program represents, this project represents the way that I think the world should be, and it reflects my values. And so I want to make more of my values happen in the world. So that's why I give the money. Now, again, these are internal, they are subjective, and they are not the things that donors are usually going to volunteer to you about why they're giving. But they're the things that you need to connect to in order to get people to give and to give more. We can boil these down to what I call the bedrock meta message of every philanthropic communication. This is the key idea that if you can keep this in mind, that no matter what you say about your organization, from a podium, across a desk, in a bar, or in your newsletter, or wherever it might be, if everything that you as a fundraiser is calculated to lead the donor back to this realization, you will succeed. And that is, supporting this institution provides opportunities to feel powerful and virtuous. Everything that you talk, everything you say about your organization, if it can lead the donor back to having this perception of your organization, you will succeed in your fundraising. Powerful and virtuous, wow, those are words that we don't use every day. And they are certainly words that your donors are not going to probably volunteer about themselves. But think about it. Donors, of course, want to be powerful. They want to make a difference in the world with their gift. They want to make something happen. And they want to be virtuous too, because they want to do this good thing for good people and to make the world a better place, not just a different place. So the takeaway here is that donors give because it feels good, not because they're going to have a new Tesla to drive, because they're going to have this intangible feeling of having made a difference and of being virtuous. That's as important as anything I have to give to you today. So how do you make donors feel good? Well, you're going to promise them that when you give to our organization, you're going to help meet the needs of society, of the community, of our beneficiaries, of our institution, and of yourself. You're going to connect with people about that because you're going to say, you know, it feels good. People will give because they know that it feels good to address society's needs when I'm someone who has an internal desire to help create a better world. See that connection? It's going to feel good to address my community's needs if I'm the kind of person who wants to express my community spirit, wants to be part of something larger and connected to others. It's going to feel good to meet the needs of your beneficiaries or your students or your clients or whoever they might be, because if I internally identify with them and want to be heroic, that's a reason why I will feel good to give to you. If you can help me understand how it would feel good to address our institution's needs because I have a need to express my gratitude for what you did for me. I want to express my loyalty, or I want to associate you with because you do something different and better than what others do, or want to associate with a winner. It's going to feel good to support you. It's also going to feel good to address my own ego needs because I want to be involved with some place where I feel relevant and appreciated and want to be included among my peers. This is the kind of formulation, the kinds of awareness you need to go into as you write the case statement for your organization, because these are the opportunities, these are the experiences that you're promising people are going to experience and feel by giving to your organization. So your task becomes, how can I make people recognize the feeling of power and virtue that can come from giving to my organization? You do that by writing a case statement that is going to promise donors that they will experience their desired internal rewards, and mapping what you do against the desired internal rewards that donors feel. That's what you're doing and developing in your case statement. So when you go to develop a case that clicks, you need to realize that donors need you as much as you need them. They want that feeling of power and virtue, and they can only get it by giving to your nonprofit. Philanthropy, therefore, is an exchange of value. It's not a one-way street where they're giving you money. You're also giving them something else back that they desire, and you're offering a specific giving proposition. If you give, here's what's going to happen, both for the world and for yourself. So let's take another look then at what I said before about what made a case effective. I told you before it should build on strengths and not needs. Well, why is that? Because you want to excite the interest of the people who want to associate with a winner. Because remember, that's a real reason that people give. And I said that it had to communicate urgency. Why is that important at a value level? Because you want to feel heroic. If people feel like they're coming to the rescue because there's an urgency, that taps into that need for them. I said that your case needed to emphasize the vision for the future. Why would you do that? Because you're trying to interest the person who is out to express their hopes for what the future will look like, right? So It's now clear why effective cases do those things, because that's what makes them connect with the donor's felt internal needs. And why make the case to be larger than the institution? Because again, I want to be part, I want to express my community service to help perfect the society that I see around me. And why promise transformational impact? Because again, I want to feel powerful. I want to be part of history. So going back to my challenge back when I was working for Advocate, my task was, how can I make people recognize a feeling of power and virtue by giving to Advocate? And to understand how we solve that problem, you have to look a little bit at the campaign for Advocate Healthcare and what it was at that time. It had those 58 priorities. Again, no, yes, really, 58 priorities. Again, 58 of anything cannot be a priority, but that's what we had to work with. And they were very diverse. They were as diverse as giving funds for charity care to assist growing roles of patients who can't afford the care. We had an adult Down syndrome center that would serve the unique and evolving needs of Down syndrome patients. We had a chapel renovation that would, provide this atmosphere for prayer and reflection in one of our hospitals. We had asthma education going on for community groups. We had a neonatal intensive care unit as something we were raising money for. We had medical research chair that would allow us to do medical research. We had medical education that will allow us to keep educating new caregivers as a funding priority. What we had was a huge hodgepodge of projects that really had no overriding inspirational vision about what the organization was trying to achieve. What we really had was what I call priorities on parade, that were 58 of them, things that people could choose to give money to. How could we help donors discover the projects that would compel them? How could we create order and higher meaning out of the laundry list? Because again, we're not talking about the dietary decisions of foxes, we're talking about hitting people at a value level. And the way we solved the problem was, and it's relevant for you too, how we could make people feel involvement in each one of these projects feel powerful and virtuous. We looked at each of those different projects, programs, and asked ourselves some questions. What is it about this project that would offer the donor an opportunity to feel heroic? What is it that goes on in this program that might make them act on gratitude or leave a legacy because they want to be part of that in an ongoing way? What is it in this particular project that would make them feel connected to something larger and to improve the community? What about this particular project is unique or excellent and therefore might tap into the interests of people who just want to associate with the winner? Or what about this is new and unprecedented and therefore would excite those people who want to create a better world? Or where's the valued orientation underneath these things that might correspond with somebody else? We asked these questions of each of the things we were trying to get people to give money to, and some patterns started to emerge. We learned there were different ways to talk about these priorities. You could appeal to different donor motivations, and these kind of motivations were baked into these priorities. For instance, charity care. You could say, what it does is creates greater access to care to relieve suffering for at-risk families. And when you phrase it that way, that taps into someone's interest in feeling heroic or helping someone in need. If you talk about charity care as taking care of those in need is going to strengthen our entire community, that taps into the people who are motivated by being part of something larger, to feel connection to the rest of the community, as opposed to an individual life that they might change. Or we said, charity care is a social responsibility. Everyone has a right to, the right level of healthcare, and that kind of formulation makes charity care appeal to those who have the value, who agree with that yes, healthcare should be a right. You see what we're doing here? We're deconstructing the priority in terms of the values that are baked into it. For Adult Down Syndrome Center, people with adult Down syndrome have now they're healthier now, so they're outliving family caretakers like they did not do in the past, and that leaves them with a series of very unprecedented problems. So again, heroism comes into play here because you're helping someone in need. Advocate Center was really a pioneer. That makes it excellent and unique, and associating with excellence might be the reason why someone would give here as well. And it is pioneering new approaches to how to work with this population. We're putting into place approaches that were never there before. So we're creating a better world. So you can be responsible for unlocking the future. That's another basis on which we could market the Adult Down Syndrome Center. For our chapel renovation, again, a very different project, but patients appreciated the spiritual dimension of the care we provided. So gratitude might be at play there. The chapel is going to bring comfort to generations of people in the future who are going to come for care in our hospital. And so it's a great opportunity to leave a legacy. Or the chapel expresses the belief that we have, and hopefully you have, in the relationship between health and the human spirit, et cetera, et cetera. And if that's a value that is present in you, that's a reason to give to the chapel renovation. We did this for every one of these things, and I'm not going to go through them in the detail that I just did, but you kind of get the game, if you will, that we're playing here. We are asking those questions of each things that we're raising money for and reducing it to its value level underneath it. Where that way we're talking our donors' language. Again, to go back to the reason that or the name of this particular fundraising or this particular presentation today. We did that with all of our priorities. And this is an eye chart that I do not expect you to read. It's here just to sort of represent the idea that we began to create a system about how we talked about our projects and looking at each project in terms of how might it tap into those real motivations that we know are the real reasons why people give. So it began to create a language of philanthropy that we were able to use across our organization. So what I want to ask you to do for a moment is to try this for yourself, to stop and think about what you're raising funds for, project or a program, or maybe your organization in general. Identify the project and then ask yourself, in what ways might that project fulfill these needs that donors have for internal rewards, and figure out for a moment just how you would connect what you raise money to those rewards. And you do this, again, as I say, by asking these questions about your program. So I really want to take a moment to kind of do this as a little exercise, because I know this has all been one way. I want to make it a little bit interactive. So think about it and ask these questions of yourself. Make a couple of notes, and then I'm going to ask some people to share what their thoughts were in just a moment. So take just a couple minutes and do that. Okay, let's come back, because hopefully you're kind of getting into the principle here about reducing and deconstructing your funding priority down to its value reward level. Does anyone want to share? And while you consider whether to share or not, one thing that you'll probably find is that as you look at your project and ask these questions of it and think creatively about it, you'll recognize that, well, yeah, my project taps into several of these things. I can, just as we did with the chapel and the Adult Down Syndrome Center and everything else, there are multiple ways that I could, values that I could potentially explain it through. And that's what you do when you get to know your donor and understand, what is it that makes my donor tick? Are they a associated with excellence person? Are they a leave a legacy sort of person? Are they a, valuing heroism kind of person? And I'm going to present this project to one person based on the reward I think that they want. I'm going to present that same project to someone else as an opportunity based on what their motivation might be. So that's good, because you can create this system of how do you talk about these things. So I'll stop talking and see if there's anyone out there who wants to offer up, kind of the answers that you came up with about your project or program. Tell me, what internal rewards donors want that you see present in your project. I think you're able to unmute and speak. If not, someone can signal me on that. I'm pretty sure we have that capability.
Yeah, attendees can unmute and turn on their cameras.
Thank you. No takers?
Doug, we do have one question in the chat regarding if a template will be offered.
Sorry, say that again.
If a template will be offered. So I think like the template from the last slide, if that something like that could be given to attendees.
Yeah, I have that as a form. I can send that to you and you can send that to the attendees where they can sort of use that as a fill-in form to kind of do that thinking as a piece. Sure.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Well, hopefully you understand the principle at work here. If there's no one who wants to share, I understand, because you're kind of walking out on a limb with people, that you don't know. But and it's hard to do this sort of thing in electronic form by Zoom. If we were all in the same room, I could, make more eye contact and make you volunteer something. But we'll go ahead and move on. So to recap where we've been here with this, the underlying implications of all that we've talked about is that people don't support organizations. They are supporting higher objectives that they value. This is where I hinted before that your organization is really a means to an end for the donor. They are not really supporting your organization. They're supporting what your organization stands for and what it's trying to achieve. And your organization is a mean to an ends for them. And the end that they're seeking is the feeling of power and virtue. And so when they give, it's really an act of self-expression to say, here's who I am and what motivates me, and I'm going to do that through your organization. And finally, not only is giving an exchange of value, it's a bargain. And that's part of what you do in the case statement, is help people understand that the money they give is going to come back to them it's going to be more than worth the sacrifice of the money to get the feeling of power and virtue that they're going to have. And that brings us to great truth number 6, which is, in your case statement, you must communicate that the value of giving exceeds the price. More on underlying implications. The case is not an argument. Sometimes we say that the argument for the institution, therefore the argument for the organization, it's not an argument. It's a promise. It's a promise of what you will achieve, what you will experience by giving to our organization, because it's that experience that they're truly giving to have. And of course, if you're offering people a promise, emotion is key in this. We are not writing grants here because our audience are not people who give money professionally for a living, by and large. These are people who are acting out of a sense of passion, and therefore your appeal to them must be passionate as well. You have to be logical and have to have facts so that to make it okay for people to feel, to act on an emotional desire to give that you've excited through your case statement. And that leads us to great truth number 7, which is logic facilitates the gift, but it's really emotion that motivates it. So as you write your case, don't be afraid to use emotional language. And remember, you're not writing a grant. So let me talk a little bit more about how we use these lessons then at Advocate, since we're keeping with that as the exemplar here. And again, I'll reiterate my spoiler alert, that is all of the things we've talked about, even though this is a big, big organization, apply to your organization as well. All of these lessons work for you too. So you will recall in our last episode when we were talking about Advocate, we had this programs on parade of these 58 different things we were raising money for. We had to ask ourselves, okay, but what do those things really add up to? How do we give them meaning in a level that will be meaningful to donors and tap into the things that they want to help make happen? How do we get them to grasp and navigate 58 different fundraising priorities? And how do we transcend the provincialism among our constituents? At that time, our donors were focused just on the hospital where they had had care, of course, because there was no meaning for the larger organization. It was all fundraising hospital by hospital in order to convey what Advocate was going to stand for as a system, to really create philanthropic brand for Advocate. And some of the new insights that we realized were that we needed to understand the projects from the donor's point of view. And we saw that the common threads that donors would grasp and would want to help us achieve through the campaign. And once we started to look at things again on this value-oriented level and roll things up, these programmatic themes began to emerge, and we were able to build a system for a donor-centric system for explaining what we were trying to do in the campaign. For instance, part of what we were trying to do was ensure access to care for people so people could overcome the financial, geographic, and cultural barriers that might not otherwise be served. And there were a bunch of different fundraising priorities that addressed that need in our campaign. Likewise, we were trying as an organization to meet special needs for adapting our care for populations that might otherwise be overlooked. And that included things like the Adult Down Syndrome Center and all of these other more specialized funding priorities that were part of the campaign. We're also trying to help people. We're embracing the spiritual dimension of care and about the idea of treating the needs of a whole person, mind, body, and spirit. And we had quite a few fundraising priorities that addressed that as the big idea that we were working toward. Advocate in its campaign was also trying to ensure health across the community and to reach out into the community and not wait till people presented in the hospital to help make them well and to prevent illness, but to meet the comprehensive healthcare needs of whole communities through education, prevention, and outreach. We had lots of different ways that you could give and lots of different great projects that you give to if that was the thing that excited you. And of course, to extend clinical excellence, to ensure the best care in key areas of care, lots and lots of fundraising priorities around different service lines and care centers and facilities, et cetera. So clinical excellence was another theme, and advancing care through innovation, to use technologies to unlock the future and to capitalize on the things that would make a better future, advancing care. We had many priorities for that as well. And educating the next generation was something that we thought donors would buy into as well at a value level, because they know that we need to have a good supply of excellent and compassionate caregivers for tomorrow. And we had ways that they could help us make that happen through these funding priorities. And transforming the care through integrated delivery. Again, we had you get the game here, which is we created buckets or thematic connections to the projects that before were 58 disconnected, disorganized things, and we created a meaning behind them that helped to umbrella them and explain them to the donors at a value level. So what this did was help us for the first time create rationales that bridged all of our hospitals and defined Advocate as a philanthropic brand, because it's those big things that we're trying to achieve. And those things happen in different ways in each of our hospitals, but those things are the things that make us a system, and those are the things that all of our hospitals have in common. That was new thinking for Advocate at that time, because again, at that time, each of the hospitals had its own brand, its own logo, its own color scheme, and all that. This was the first time that we really defined Advocate as a system. And we also created these tasks that would compel donors at a value level, those tasks that we were trying to achieve, the things I just went through. And those thematic things enabled us to create a more donor-centered approach in our fundraising. We had 58 different priorities. We didn't have to stop and think about how do we get donors to understand what all these things are. We could just ask, what do you want to achieve in the world? What are you about? What kind of a donor are you? And not in these words, but what are the internal rewards that are going to be most compelling to you? Because no matter what kind of donor you are, what kind of internal reward you seek, we have a project by which you can achieve that feeling of power and virtue, that advocate. So we ask people, what is it that you want to achieve? What would be meaningful to you to overcome barriers for the needy, to adapt our care for people who would otherwise be overlooked, to treat the needs of the whole person, their spiritual needs as well, to unlock the promise of the future, to meet the needs of communities as a whole, and to ensure the best possible care for people, to instill excellence and compassion in tomorrow's caregivers, to revolutionize the way that medical knowledge is used and shared to create care. What is it that would be meaningful to you? And so once we got people to talk on that way and focused on them to understand them at a value level, then we knew how to talk to them about the next step, which is how we could fulfill their needs for those internal rewards. And all of this work was background into the case statement. Obviously, there was a lot of work that got us to these things, but it all came down to asking, as you must do, what do your donors want to achieve? Who is it? What is motivating them at a value level? And then your case is where you explore all those connections and you answer the questions of, how are the projects that I'm raising money for, how might they answer someone's interest to feel rewarded for inventing the future or giving back in gratitude or whatever it might be. So I'm going to pause there for a moment because this connecting with people at a values level and doing that through the case is really kind of the crux of the whole thing I'm trying to deliver to you today. But I did promise as well, for those of you who are on the case of writing cases, some enough psychology about how it works. Let's dig into how do you do this thing, and what are the stages that you work through to write your case statement. Well, there are basically 3 stages. You have to do your discovery, your research to get the information, and then you have to develop the message, and then you have to execute it by writing the thing. Simple enough. There are multiple formats that your case can take. It can be a narrative version where you are writing a full exploration, where you're putting in the factoids and the anecdotes and the quotes, and you're concentrating on terms of phrase. And what you're doing in that case is you're creating this toolbox of resource that you can go back to and draw from for your philanthropic communications for years, really. I've had people who say, I still have the case that you wrote for us, and I still go back to it all the time because it's time now to write a letter again, where I can find something in the case that I can build that letter around. Or we're giving a speech at our upcoming fundraiser, and I'm going to go to the case because that's going to be where I begin with it. So a long narrative version is very helpful to do that with. But of course, you also can and should do it at the prospectus level, where it's agreed, very informative, just a couple of pages. And you really can and should also boil it down to just the key messages that are really just like sort of at a glance, the elevator speech that is, the smallest possible formulation of your case for support. Another way that I've done it some recently is through, there are a lot of electronic tools that will let you do this. Adobe, I think the product used to be called Spark. I think it's changed now, but you can put your case statement in a place that really accompanies it with emotive photos as well as copy, so that it does start to become more presentational, that you could send a link to a donor and they could see it. And there are beautiful tools that allow us to do that sort of thing very easily. So I've mentioned before that the conundrum is, when deciding how long your case is going to be, I think to do a really good job, yes, it's got to be short because you have to be able to distill it down to its essence. But to be able to do that distillation, you have to go long first so that you can go short. Or maybe that's just me, but I put a lot of work into these things and explore all the angles so that I know what are the right few words that will be most representative of what our organization is about. Talking about the research, printed materials, of course, are very useful. Strategic plan, mission statement, view books, surveys, annual reports, all of that is good grist for you to build a mosaic of what is getting said in the case. All of that, you're looking for facts, validation, the meat of stuff that will go into the case. The key to success in doing research through the printed materials is beware of overdoing it, because your donor is not going to read all of that. Your volunteer doesn't need all of the detail. Again, we're not writing a grant. We are trying to lift people and connect with them emotionally and on a value level. So again, you need the logic of the facts and validation, et cetera, but it's really the emotion that is going to move people to do the actual giving. So you need to explore that as well. And you do that through having interviews with people who are in a position to know about the work that you do. Those could be done through either with individuals or in small groups, with the leaders of your organization, with your donors, because they have reasons why they give as well, of course, and whoever it is that you serve, alumni, students, parents, clients, faculty, community members, patients, et cetera. And what you're getting from these interviews now is not so much the facts, although you will find some facts, of course, that these people deliver to you. It's really a lot more about the emotional dimension. Hearing people talk about about the organization and why it's meaningful to them, I find that's where the juice comes from. That's where the Kool-Aid that I drink, really begins, is hearing people talk about the organization. And that's what gets me excited so that I can persist in going back and doing the slog of writing this document that is meant to, bring all this together in a compelling way. So when you're doing interviews, remember that this is not a survey. You're not going to ask them a list of 10 questions and multiple choice with their answers. I usually go into an interview, I do a lot of them, with about 3 questions. And what really works is to listen and think on your feet, to listen to their answer and listen for the next question that is involved in what they say. And that can create really great interviews, really great interaction that not only gets you excited, but also is very cultivational and building of the culture of philanthropy for whoever it is you're talking with. Because again, it's following up on what is most meaningful to them about the organization. Also, you have to take the right notes. You're not going to write down everything they say, but you're going to, be sifting while you're listening to take notes about the things that you're going to use later. So that is probably pretty intuitive, but take the notes at the level that are just going to be needed for you to go back and fill in later, because you're also doing this thinking on your feet at the same time. So when you're interviewing, some of the starter questions I go in with are things like, what makes this organization unique among others? What are its dearly held values? Because again, if I can map the connections between our organization's values and my donor's values, I'm far along in writing my case. What's the vision that's driving the organization, especially if we're in a campaign? How is the world going to be different in the future because of what we're doing? And in what ways is this campaign going to transform the institution? Where does the urgency for our fundraising for this campaign come from? What's the opportunity that we're trying to take advantage of? Or what's the threat that we're trying to ward off? Because again, cases and fundraising are emotional propositions. And the story comes from overcoming the forces that are threatening us or seizing the opportunities that are there to be had. And you get those from hearing how people talk about it. You might also ask, about 10 years from now, visually explain to me describe the difference between, that the difference this campaign has made in the organization and the people that it serves. So having people sort of visualize that for you can be very helpful and powerful as well. This is, you will come back from having done a bunch of these interviews with lots of notes. And, I would always find I want to somehow encompass everything that people has said and, to really build the through line of this. And when I do this in person, I show what I mean by a map of the case, but I would get a big piece of butcher block paper that was 3 feet by 3 feet, and I would just start filling in the big ideas and the connections, the smaller anecdotes and factoids and that kind of thing in around it. It really became this very almost confused looking picture to anyone who doesn't know what is going on with it. But with the various lines and connections, I was able to create a kind of a word cloud, if you will, of what the case will look like and how all of the pieces, the major sections would fit together. So that was my method. Other people don't do it that way. They just sit down and start writing. That can work too. But I would recommend that you do an outline first so that sort of the beats, if you will, of how your logic for how you're going to reel people in is going to work. And remember I said, connect with the donor first at the value level, framing a case that's larger than the institution. Don't start out in your case by talking about your organization. Your organization is the answer, not the question. So begin at the value level, talking about the people that you serve and the urgency that they feel in their lives. Then you can go on to talk about how your organization is unique and that it has, a unique opportunity to fulfill all of those needs. And you have to document, what is it that our beneficiaries or our students, patients, whoever they might be, what is it that they're facing as a threat or an opportunity that helps them to divine the urgency. And then as you've already developed, how your organization is unique, create and relate the proof points that show that if you were going to invest anywhere to address the needs of these people, doing it here would be the place to do it because of these particular facts. You have to go on then to describe philanthropy's pivotal role in the organization. And this is important because every time you go into a campaign, for sure, really anytime, you're writing more than one case. You have to make the case for the moment because you have to talk about the urgency of why people need to respond now to make the world better. You have to make the case for the organization, again, as the place that you would choose to do that. You also have to make the case for philanthropy, because people could agree that there's an urgency in the world. They could agree that your organization does a great thing. But until I've positioned for them the importance of what philanthropic funds will do for the organization and what they'll let us do, I haven't connected all of the dots that need to be connected to get them to give. So develop philanthropy's pivotal role. Then you can offer specific funding opportunities that you want them to pay attention to. And again, hopefully at a value level. And then, start to zoom back out by promising that, all of this is going to have a transformational impact. Finally, you crystallize the call for action. You lay out the giving proposition. When you give, this is the change that will happen. And what's embedded and underneath that is, and you're also going, parenthetically, you're going to feel a sense of power and virtue when you help make that happen. Then after you've written all that, back up and write a half-page executive summary of that whole thing. Because if you begin with the executive summary, write that, you're ready to go long on the rest of it. So another tip that I would say is I would always try to start with some magic. I would actually, let myself go and write some poetry. Maybe not literally poetry, but I want to put all the emotion out on the page to begin with, because that's what gets me excited about writing the rest of it, the more factual parts, to go from there. And I would develop a compelling theme for, again, hitting people at a value level about why we're raising the money, engage the senses by helping people see your beneficiary, your patient, your client, your student, whoever it might be. Show me them in their circumstance and why they need and benefit from what we do. I usually would, create sort of a prototypical person that I would tell the organization story through, and then use that person to personalize the work of the organization. And having written this at the beginning, this sort of emotional way of pulling people in, perhaps through the story or an image of someone that's the kind of person we help, I would bookend the end back to the beginning so that people are reminded of that person that I introduced them to at the beginning. And that was a very artful way of bringing people back around to what this is really all about after they've read the whole thing. Tip number 4 is do the right mode of writing at the right time. When you first start out writing your case, just express the thoughts. Don't worry about the wordsmithing. Go back later to do the wordsmithing and fill in the gaps. You have to separate the going for the flow from doing the wordsmithing, because those two disciplines use two different sides of your mind. Your right brain is the one that is getting the thoughts out, getting the emotions out, getting the compelling nature of it out. If you try to edit the words that you're using to get that out at the same time as you're trying to make that flow happen, you're going to jam up your brain, and you're going to end up in writer's block because you're trying to perfect something that's not quite even conceived yet. Don't do that. Do the conception, get excited about it, and then go back and refine. And for crying out loud, write the way people talk. So much of what I read that's been written by organizations are written by people inside, and of course they have they know their stuff, they work with it every day, so they want to tell people about it, and that usually ends up with a lot of jargon kinds of expressions about what it is that we do. And what that jargon does is that it distances people from their world. It makes a barrier between jumping from their world to your world. So if you're an organization that I think you know what I mean. If you should not sound like a social worker in your case. You should sound like a person, and dial out from that kind of jargon to make the connection. In doing this, you need to transform needs into benefits, and you don't do that like this. Here's Blondie and Dagwood. This guy comes to the door with a wagon full of magazines, says, "Good evening, sir. I'm selling back issues of old magazines." And he asks, "Well, why?" And we have entire inventory for $100. Well, why should I buy your old magazines? Well, for one reason, because I'm done with them. This is not writing to the need of your constituent. This is writing to your needs. So you have to transform you have to talk about what you're offering in terms of the benefit to the donor. Really, that's been the whole theme of what I'm talking about today. So when you transform needs into benefits, you're not talking in terms of a student aid endowment. You are talking about opening the doors of education for all. You don't talk about the faculty development fund because that's boring and that's not anything that has meaning in my world, but I might be interested in the idea of encouraging excellence in teaching because that is something that I care about in my world. And likewise, don't talk about snoozy endowment for model academic programs, blah, 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 because again, that gets into the jargon that is meaningful inside your organization, but not outside. Instead, talk about transforming the nature of urban education or whatever it might be. Because again, these are the ways that you tap into your donors' experience of the world. So the way you continue is you have to write it now. Don't let your discovery notes sit around on your desk for a long time because you will lose the momentum, you will lose the inspiration, and then it'll become a chore. And when writing a case becomes a chore, it's not going to be a good product. Once you have written it, let it cool, and then go back to it and evaluate it critically, because upon second look, all the things that you were really excited about, you will realize now, oh, I need to edit that because it needs to be different and better. Do that mercifully for yourself. Admit that it's still too long. Then shift your ego into neutral. And when you're about to send it off with people who are going to review it, take a deep breath. And just before you click send, take a moment to appreciate that at that moment, your case statement is perfect. And that is the last moment that it will be so, because you have written this thing to be excellent in every way. And what's going to happen now is people are going to start reviewing it and using it and agreeing and disagreeing with you. And that review is the necessary evil that you have to go through that I've talked about before. Because remember, it's that review process that gives the case its real value, because you're making the organization real. I can't tell you how many times I've delivered a case to someone and the board as they're talking about it, and someone will say, yes, this is great. This is exactly what we need to be saying about ourselves. I can't believe we haven't thought to say it this way before. And the board member next to them will say, really? Is that what you think that we do? Is that where we're really taking the organization? And it's in the reconciliation of those two talking about what it is that we really do, prompted by the case, that the culture of philanthropy gets built. And that is the importance of the case. So I'm going to wrap up now and have a couple minutes for questions, but let's review what we've learned, the 8 great truths about case statements. You can raise money without a real case, but you can't raise real money. Remember that your case statement is a process, not a product. Remember that you're writing for the volunteer, not your donor. Remember great truth number 4, that your institution is the last thing your case should talk about. It should start with the needs of the people that you serve. Remember that an effective case addresses the good reasons and the real reasons for giving. Remember 2, that every case presents a clear philanthropic value proposition, and that the value of giving exceeds the price. That is, that the sacrifice of the money you give up is nothing compared to the feeling that you're going to get of power and virtue from the experience. Remember that logic facilitates and emotion motivates. And great truth number 8, face it and use it. Donors are not trying to fulfill your organization's needs. They're trying to fulfill their own. And you write the case statement to create the connection between their values and what you're trying to get done. That is really the essence of what goes into a case statement, why you do it, and how you do it. So I'll stop there because this looks like a good ending slide, and see if people have questions or anything that I can speak to from all that I've delivered to you this morning.
There's something in the chat. What advice do you have for an organization that does not primarily do direct service work, but instead takes a convening or governing role for other nonprofits? We often struggle to relay to donors how important and essential this work is in moving the needle system-wide, because they don't see the direct impact of their dollars.
I'm reading into the question. I don't know the organization, but the essential mission of the organization to do that convening, and I'm picturing it's an organization that brings together other organizations. I think you make the case by talking about the importance of that and how that pays off. The idea that it's the coordination of and the cross-pollinating of and the concerted action that's brought about by the convening. Again, if I'm reading a lot into the question, but to talk about how that creates heroic movement in the sector, that for all of those organizations benefit from, and try to get the donor to imagine what would the world be like in the absence of that. Again, you're not doing direct service, but in the absence of having a convening entity like that, all of these organizations would be off doing their own thing and not creating a synergy of effect by collaborating together and learning from best practice from each other. Again, I'm completely making up what I think your organization is about, but again, the principle holds: reduce it to a value level of what your donor wants to feel like they achieve. And it doesn't have to be that you are in the trenches, helping kids off the street in order to create a sense of emotion and a sense of power and virtue for your donor. And it's just, how do you find those connections?
Okay, thanks, Doug. And we'd like to thank all of our participants today. I think that perhaps everybody's been a little overwhelmed with some of the material that has been presented. It has been really, really helpful. And I'm guessing that people need a little time to digest it all. We're a little bit over, and so I appreciate folks hanging in there till the end. The slides will be made available if they weren't already. So you'll have a chance to look over materials, and hopefully, Doug, you might be available for folks to reach out with a couple questions, possibly going forward. But I think, the bottom line here is just remembering the why questions that donors need to get addressed for themselves. And we have to get out of our heads as far as thinking from our perspective as opposed to that of the volunteer or the donor. So again, thank you for participating with us today. And we hope that we see folks in our future sessions. The next topic in our fundraising series is going to be next week with Mary Morton. It's about nonprofit board fundraising with an abundance mindset. We ask that you do give us feedback in your evaluations that will pop up when you leave or before you log out of Zoom, but there's also a link that was put into the chat today. And so we really, really pay attention to your comments. That's what guides us in our planning for other sessions and selecting presenters and so on. So again, thank you, take care, and hope to see you next week on March 27th at that session. And thanks again, Doug.
Thank you. Take care.